Hello, Sim here. So as I promised, here's the all-in-one guide for the Netduma. Yes, but first let's do the public safety announcement. Oh yes. Now if you're not running 1.03.6i, go to the Netduma forum unless the Duma OS is already out when you're watching this video and download it. Why? Because it fixed the crack. K-R-A-C-K, a vulnerability that affects your Wi-Fi home network. So download it so you secure your own Wi-Fi network from hackers. Oh yes. And by the way, if you own any other routers, go to your manufacturer's website and download their latest updates too, because this affects all routers. Okay, safety announcement over. What's this guy going to go into? This guy's going to talk about how to get the best from your home internet to improve your online gaming experience. No router is going to fix a broken game. The developer will need to fix their client code, i.e. the game code that runs on the console and PC or Macintosh, and the server code. But what we're going to do in this guide is focus on getting your end of the connection as optimal as possible to give you the best fighting chance to have an enjoyable gaming experience. So there's a whole wide variety of setups when it comes to modem and router setups, and I'm not going to go into a zillion different setups. I'm just going to cover the two common setups that most people will have. Anything more exotic, please go and consult Netduma support because that's what you've paid for. So the two setups I'm going to cover are modem to Netduma, i.e. your Netduma is plugged directly into a modem, or more likely your Netduma is plugged into an existing ISP router / modem, because some of these things are, all-in-one boxes. Let's face it, like BT Home Hub these days and Virgin, what do they call them, Super Hubs? That type of thing. There's going to be all these sort of things across the world. Okay, so let's focus on modem to Netduma. So the Netduma being plugged directly into the modem. So here you've replaced an existing router with the Netduma. You plug the WAN port directly into the modem. So on the settings page for WAN, typically you're going to either have PPPoE, and that's what I have for my case for BT Infinity, where you enter the username and the password of BT. Now, if you get prompted by the Netduma to automatically detect your bandwidth when using PPPoE, select no. I can't remember how this dialog pops up, but select no. Because if you do select yes, go and do it automatically for me because I'm feeling lazy, you're going to get a lot less bandwidth, like 10 megs less than what you should be getting. I'll talk about how you get over this bit later on towards the end of the video. Okay, so you can connect via PPPoE. You can use a static IP address that your ISP has given you, along with DNS server IP addresses and all that malarkey. That's all the stuff that the ISP will send you. Sometimes, and this is the days of old ADSL, when you replace an existing ISP router, you would have to clone its MAC address to use that MAC address as authentication to connect to your ISP to get internet access. So if you need to clone your MAC address, this is where you would do it. Now VLAN, we typically leave that disabled, but your ISP may want it enabled. I'm thinking like internet TVs and stuff like that get a bit more specialist. I don't muck around with VLAN tagging as it's known. So this is where you may need to consult both your ISP and again a Netduma technical support for that particular one. IPv6, I typically leave this disabled, purely to maximize my performance for the Netduma. However, if your ISP is forcing you to be IPv6 and only IPv6, then you're going to have that option ticked. Now MTU, I typically leave this as automatic, i.e. I always leave this as automatic. You again only need to manually set this if the value is being directed by your ISP and the Netduma is getting it wrong, because of some weird protocol that you need to adhere to. Now the MTU stands for the maximum transmission unit. This dictates the maximum size of data that goes within the Ethernet payload, as it's known, of an individual Ethernet packet. All the surrounding data is for a protocol and the 7-layer OSI model of the internet for when it comes to TCP IP. Got a bit techie there, but that's the facts. Now there's a lot of misinformation out there suggesting, hey, If you just muck about with the MTU, it's going to fix all the game problems. And my suggestion, and what I'm going to tell you guys, is just don't do it. Just don't muck about with it. Anybody who's claiming to have had it fix their problems has had their router and their home network set up for online access. It's just misconfigured in the first place from my perspective. It's just a completely placebo effect in my books. So leave MTU on automatic. Now, following on from the IPv6 that I was talking about earlier on, saying ideally you want it disabled to maximize the performance of the Netduma because the hardware that we currently got is not the most powerful. You also want to go to settings and LAN and disable IPv6 there. Also again, ensure the MTU is set to automatic. Then go to settings and miscellaneous and disable enable link local IPv6. Okay, so we covered the modem to Netduma setup. We're now going to move on to the modem router combined to a Netduma. So i.e. this could be a modem that plugs into an existing ISP router that does some proprietary protocol stuff. That is the only way you're going to get online, and therefore you're forced to put your Netduma directly into that ISP router. So if you have an ISP modem and an ISP router and they don't use a weird proprietary protocol, then I would recommend having modem connected to the Netduma and then the ISP router connected to that, because most likely your ISP router is going to provide 5G Wi-Fi, and you want any 5G Wi-Fi routers plugged into your Netduma for Bufferbloat reasons, and I'm going to explain about what that is later on in the video. So for now, I'm just going to assume you got a Netduma plugged into a router. So in this case, we go to settings WAN, we disable PPPoE, disable WAN IP, you disable the WAN MAC address, disable the WAN VLAN, and again, disable the IPv6. And again, check the LAN and miscellaneous pages as I previously described. Go to those and disable those too. MTU is set to automatic. Now on your ISP router, the steps required here, you're going to need to consult your router manual, as various routers do this differently. I'm going to give an example with TP-Link in the background, but basically the steps required are you need to reserve an IP address for your Netduma, and it's typically associated via selecting the MAC address from a drop-down menu that says, hey, it's a Netduma or something along those lines, or you've got to manually enter the MAC address. Then you go and make sure you enable DMZ, that demilitarized zone, enter that IP address that you reserved into that DMZ. Then go back to your Netduma, settings miscellaneous, and make sure the enable UPnP forwarding is ticked. Why do we want to do this? This stops what is known as double natting. You have all heard of open NAT. Well, double natting will prevent you from getting an open NAT, hence why you want to do what I've just described. Put the Netduma inside a DMZ on the router that you've connected it to. All devices should ideally be plugged into the Netduma for Bufferbloat reasons. Again, I will come on to that later on in the video. So that bit of the video concludes the whole basic Netduma getting you online setup. So I'm now going to cover the key performance settings. So here we're going to go to settings miscellaneous. First of all, we're going to untick enable deep packet processing. This option is only used for PC gaming. It does stuff for tracking statistics, but typically in the past I've lost 10 megs of bandwidth when using this feature. Also, it doesn't apply to consoles because, well, console network traffic is encrypted. You remember I talked about the Ethernet payload? That's where the real data sits inside your Ethernet packet. All of that lot is encrypted. So it can't do anything because, you know, if you could, we'd all have fun and games on the internet when it comes to console gaming. Anyway, I digress. Also, I tend to have allow auto feedback disabled, allow remote access to Netduma technical support disabled. Obviously, if you're having issues, you'll be phoning them and what's it, and they'll tell you to go and enable it so they can go and help you out. But typically that's off. Enable UPnP forwarding, definitely enabled. You want it enabled. Enable multicast snooping. Now this is a personal choice and typically I have this disabled. The only reason you're going to need to enable this is if you can't find media players, you know, DLNA and all that jazz on your home network, i.e. you want to stream through your NAS and your NAS is plugged directly into your Netduma and it can't find it, etc., then you need to enable multicast snooping. The enable link local IPv6 should be disabled. As I told you earlier, I have all IPv6 disabled for performance reasons. I lose about 2 megs if I have it enabled. Also, you want the access control panel from WAN not recommended disabled. Otherwise anybody can just log onto it from the internet. You don't want that. Also, enable cookies should be enabled because this remembers all of the settings that you've ticked on this miscellaneous page and some other pages too. When it comes to enable Wi-Fi workaround, I typically have this disabled. You only need to enable this if you have Wi-Fi problems. Again, I would suggest if you do have Wi-Fi problems to consult the Netduma technical support. That's what they're there for. Stealth mode I typically have enabled. This just gives you an extra layer of privacy for protection against hackers. Now the turbo mode and super turbo, which has brackets disabled CC, which is congestion control, having these ticks will depend on your ISP and whether the Netduma is connected directly to a modem or not. If it's connected directly to a modem, then you'll probably need to enable these if you have real high bandwidths. So you need to tick these options to get the higher bandwidths. Note, if you do have super turbo enabled, you can't take advantage of congestion control, which is for Bufferbloat reasons. So when you do want to have a good Bufferbloat for online gaming, i.e. when you're just gaming, then you'll probably have to untick that and sacrifice bandwidth for having low ping. And again, we'll come on to that later on. Now the next section on this page is with a username and password. It's good security practice to have this enabled, especially if you accidentally have your WAN, logging on from WAN enabled accidentally, because then at least you've got some protection on your router. But it also stops any kiddies and stuff like that mucking about with your Netduma settings. You go on to all that hard work of setting it all up, and then you have a kiddie log on and go and you swear and curse for the next few days whilst you try to get everything back to how it was, unless you've used profiles, but I'll come back onto that later. So cloud settings, you want to enable auto cloud, that's to be enabled, and a bleeding edge cloud to be enabled too. If you ever have problems with the cloud, so the cloud in this particular case, we're sort of jumping ahead for a second because I'm stepping through the Netduma settings in a particular sequence order because it helps at the end of the day. There is logic behind the madness. So that affects the Geofilter, where it determines where your dedicated servers are in the world and where other people are in the world. So if you ever have problems, every so often, once a month maybe, untick both of these, the enable auto cloud and bleeding edge cloud, click apply, wait for that to take effect, then tick both again and click apply. What you've just done here is flush the cloud, so basically forget what you knew about the cloud, go and refetch it so I know it's going to be refreshed and up to date and accurate. So that covers the key performance settings. So now we're going to move on to DHCP, reserving IP addresses, naming devices, UPnP, and fork porting. They're all related, and this is why I'm going through it in a particular order. So first of all, if we go to settings and LAN, the host address is defaulted to 88. I typically leave it unchanged. Only advanced home networks are going to wish to change this value, and you probably totally understand what DHCP does. The subnet mask is disabled. You cannot edit this. Again, this will be used by advanced home network setups, and hopefully in future when the Duma OS comes out, this will be an editable value to allow us who are more advanced to go and do crazy network setups. Okay, so DHCP should absolutely be enabled by default. The from and to ranges says basically that the 192.168.88.100 to 250 is the range that I want the IP addresses to be assigned within my home network. So each device will be assigned an address at the end, somewhere between 100 to 250. These are default values. You don't need to muck about with those. The lease time though, I've maximized it to 1 week. It's maximum, it's not its default value. I can't remember what its default value is, but I would suggest maximizing it out to 1 week. And the reason I did this was to eliminate additional problems with OpenNAT style issues down the road. Notably the goddamn PlayStation. Anyway, so By having it maximized, then the PlayStation ain't going to get confused and pick up different IP addresses, but we're going to reserve IP addresses to avoid / reduce that kind of problem. Okay, automatic DNS is enabled. Any mucking around within this section is only required by those who have some exotic home network setup. Again, IPv6 is disabled unless you absolutely have to have it because your ISP says you must, but within your home network, you really shouldn't need IPv6. Auto MTU again is enabled. Okay, so we're now going to move on to naming devices, and this is going to make your life so much easier. So we're going to go to the device manager page, and this will currently show what is connected and online. In other words, powered up. And when I say online, I mean powered up. So solid line means that you've got wired, i.e. Ethernet cable connections to your router. So, your console, if it's online, it should always be wired. It should never be Wi-Fi. You guys should know that. I've hammered that home so many times, but I'll hammer it home right now. Use wired connection for consoles for online gaming. Use your Wi-Fi for mobiles, tablets, that type of jazz. So Wi-Fi is dashed lines. So if we go to Device Manager and click Edit, we get a list of devices with all their associated IP addresses. On this page, you can edit their names as appropriate. So Xbox One, PlayStation 3, which defaults to unnamed, I don't know what I am. So yes, you can edit their names as appropriate. The IP address on each device will help you determine what it is. The MAC address is not shown on this particular page. That's shown on the DHCP leased page, which we'll be visiting shortly. But between the IP and MAC addresses, that should help you determine what some of these unnamed devices will come up as. Also, you can select the device type, like general purpose, think workstation, game console, oh that's a tricky one, phone, printer, tablet and laptop. All that does is really just show or change the graphical pictation for the symbology shown on the web page associated with that device to give you an idea of what it is. Now, as I mentioned already, nameless devices typically come up from Wi-Fi devices, PS3 being an exception because back in the old days it didn't have a name. It did not present a name to the router, so it didn't know what it was, it just said nameless. But typically, Wi-Fi devices will come up as nameless. And then somebody's just got a new phone in your house and they're connecting, it comes up with nameless and you can go, Fred's new phone, whatever it be. Dormant devices can be deleted, so maybe you had a friend who came around to your house, used it just for the one-off, threw away the phone, you can go and delete it off there and hey presto. So, reserving IP addresses. This is an important bit for open NAT stuff. So, reserving IP addresses. This is important stuff when it comes to open NAT. Basically pay attention. So, go to Settings, DHCP Lease. Here you're going to see two columns that contain read-only fields, i.e. you cannot edit them. The MAC address, which is associated with the network card of the device, and the name. This is the one that you typed in the device manager page. You can only edit it in the device manager page. By ticking reserve plus entering a number between the 100 to 250 as we specified on the LAN settings page will mean, for example, if we do it on a console or against the console entry, this will mean that that console will always have the same IP address. This is very, very handy for helping you get that open NAT. Okay, so we're going to move on to settings, UPnP. This should always be enabled, so tick it. It's defaulted to ticked by default, so don't untick it unless you really need to at one point because the whole UPnP table, which gives you a list of open ports, have really got themselves in a pickle. Untick it, click apply, and then retick it and click apply so it's enabled. But once it's enabled, you'll see here in my particular case, listed on the screen is 115, which equals my Xbox One X, and 140, which equals the PS4, and these are the tail end numbers. So ports 3074 is for the PS4, and 3076 is for the Xbox One. And those of you who play Call of Duty will recognize those ports because they're opened up automatically by the game. Unless you're playing Black Ops 3. So, as I just hinted to, some games do not make proper UPnP requests or just fail to request it full stop. Fantastic. So what do you do in this case? Well, you go to Settings, Port Forward. Now we enter the reserved IP address against our gaming machine. Now you know why we reserve the IP address, because we don't want it changing, and this makes it a lot easier. So here we enter a rule name, start and end ports, and select like TCP, UDP, or both, and of course the IP address. Now there's an important note, multiple rules cannot use the same port numbers, so you can't have like 3074 against the Xbox and PS4, it just doesn't work. This is why port forwarding is considered a last resort. You really want the console and game to use UPnP all the time. It just does additional magic and takes away all the headaches, trust me. So once you've entered the rule, you need to click apply for the change to come in effect. Even though it looks like it might be in effect, click apply. Now one of the annoyances that currently, and hopefully this will change in the Duma OS when it comes out, is you cannot edit an existing rule. You are forced to delete it and then recreate it. You can disable and enable a rule at any time. Remember, again, click apply after you've done that. Generally, any rules I have are set up for a problematic game will be sitting here in a disabled state, so I can enable them when required. So that concludes the DHCP, reserving IP addresses, naming devices, UPnP, and port forwarding. Everything you want to know about to get a optimal open NAT. It's all key stuff. It makes life easier and a lot more stuff easier down the line. So let's jump over to Wi-Fi. Now this is going to settings and Wi-Fi, and it's a fairly simple setup, and yes, it's limited to 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi. There is no 5 GHz option, as the hardware just doesn't support it. I know it's a bit of a bummer by a lot of people out there, but hopefully a future one will support 5G, and I'm pretty certain it will have to support 5G. Anyway, if you want 5 GHz Wi-Fi, then I suggest plug in your 5 GHz Wi-Fi router into the Netduma to take advantage of Bufferbloat. Again, I'm going to cover this later. So moving back to just the Netduma and 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi, we obviously want it enabled if you want to use Wi-Fi. You want to select an appropriate security standard. Don't select none, because otherwise anybody can log onto your Wi-Fi network. That's like leaving your house door unlocked. Why would you do it? You don't. Right. So obviously you name your Wi-Fi network, and that's known as an SSID name. And it's visible to all. There is no option to not broadcast their SSID. A lot of routers have always had the don't broadcast my name please. It's like being X directory in the yellow pages, etc. That's a telephone directory for those who's not familiar with what the yellow pages are. Anyway, so enter the password and make sure it's not a simple guessable one like, hey, it's Sim's password, or it's SimJC74, or something silly, right? Because that's obvious. So choose something that's a little bit more complex. So for the channel number, we have to select an appropriate one, and we have to manually select it. There is no automatic determine the best one. We have to do that ourselves. So to help optimize this manual setup, I suggest you use an app called Wi-Fi Analyzer on your phone to be available for Android and iOS. This will help you scan Wi-Fi networks, give you a little graph, and then you can pick the channel that has the less clutter. So it gives you the best 2.4 gigahertz option, Wi-Fi signal strength that you're going to have. Obviously bandwidth 2.4 gigahertz, it's the only option. So, well, there's no choice yet. So that's Wi-Fi covered. So moving on to host analysis and internet diagnosis. Host analysis is a PC-only game statistics type of information. I don't use this feature because I game on console, and remember I talked about disabling the enable deep packet processing on the miscellaneous page. If you want the best networking performance possible and you don't want to overload the Netduma R1 gaming router because the hardware spec is a bit struggling from time to time, I suggest you have that feature turned off on the miscellaneous page. If you're really interested, go for it. Right, so internet diagnosis. This is a useful feature of the Netduma that's not on many routers I've seen so far at all, because it cuts out so many problems. So if you have problems with your ISP, you can use this option to get technical output. It will report your overall ping, your jitter, your spike, and packet loss. So it'll give you a high level status to indicate whether you've got an ISP issue or not. The shows detail button provides a more low level technical information. So if you've got ISP issues and stuff like that, I would suggest working with Netduma tech support will probably help you approach your ISP if there is an issue, i.e. give you guidance on keywords to use. Now, having this option on the Netduma really cuts out a whole host of other possible sources of problems, i.e. network cables being connected to PCs and Macintoshes, Wi-Fi issues, software issues on those workstations and laptops, i.e. those pesky antivirus and firewall softwares and God knows what else. Also, most importantly, it cuts out all the typical ISP excuses too, because you can say, no, I ran this test directly on the router. The problem is with your network, Mr. ISP. Go fix it. Go get your engineer out, go over to the box across the street and go and fix it, because they broke something. It was working fine last week. So there's also a couple of quick links to PlayStation and Xbox websites to indicate their health status. So if you can never remember it, you can just go to your Netduma website and bang, off you go to the two gaming network websites to figure out that yes, they're down. But also there's Twitter out there which will also confirm that it's down. Right, okay, so we've finished that. The hosting as an internet diagnosis. I do like that internet diagnosis feature. Very useful. So, network monitor, continuing on with the diagnostic theme. If you really want to know how much data a game is using whilst playing online, this is the page for you. You can filter out other devices of non-interest, so you can just leave your console of interest ticked or your gaming machine of interest ticked. And that's why you named everything on the device manager page, so you know what you're ticking and unticking. Now, also selecting the device type on the device manager page controls the icon associated with each named device. You know, tablets and mobiles got things that look like tablets and mobiles, and gaming consoles, they look like, well, a controller, a gaming controller with thumbsticks and stuff. Printers look like printers, and workstations, wow, they just look like a big fat monitor. Anyway, so it's a very useful page, and it can also let you know if you're having online gaming problems, if somebody else was seriously hogging the internet and going, oh yeah, they're downloading a whole ton of stuff. I'll go and have a friendly word with them, maybe. But there are options out there to do with Bufferbloat, but I'll come back to that one later. So next, VPN, Virtual Private Network. This is the one thing I do not personally use, and therefore it's omitted from this guide. This is the one thing that this guide is not going to cover. There are a couple of setup options, fast setup and advanced. The details for the settings will be specific to your VPN provider. You need to select which devices will use the VPN, and you can also add exceptions to each device. Again, if you need support for VPN, talk to Netduma and your VPN provider. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to use a get out of jail card. I don't use VPN, so I cannot give you any technical setup on this, but it's just like connecting to an ISP. You're going to have different usernames, login passwords, and other jazz. Okay, so at this point of the guide, we've now covered all the fundamentals. It's really important that all that stuff is in place. This is going to help us move on to the most important features of the Netduma, and this is why you predominantly own it, to optimize your connection and gaming experience. Remember that this is a guide. In other words, numbers and settings that work for me will not necessarily work for you. With the exception of those who live in the UK and have a BT Infinity for their ISP. They'll probably need a couple of minor tweaks, but they can use those as a quick start cheating, cut out a load of work for themselves. So I want to stress that this is a guide. This is the bit which is the guide bit. This is where I'm going to talk about approach and methodology. There generally is no magic numbers. I know, we're gamers. We all like it to be easy. We just want to punch in a few magic numbers and hey presto, we can go and play the game and off we go. Done. If only life was that easy. So going to move on to congestion control. Now you've heard me mention several times earlier in this video the phrase Bufferbloat. And here's where I'm going to discuss this in relation to your internet connection. But first of all, I'm going to talk about hypertraffic, which is at the bottom of the page. I do not use hypertraffic. The reason I do not use it is it seems to have knock-on effects for me, which causes bugs to occur within the Geofilter, and therefore local servers, i.e. those ones in the UK, being blocked. Thus, by not using this, remember I'm multi-console, I have an Xbox and a PS4, well I have two Xboxes now. I have had a lot less issues with the geofilter, i.e. padlocks being inside my geofilter. Anyway, I'm sort of jumping ahead for the geofilter, but that's why I don't use it. It causes problems for me. So for those of you who are not familiar with the intent of hypertraffic, and maybe you only own one gaming console and therefore it's going to be a lot less of an issue for you, it is a jump the queue. Completely bypass it. It's not like traditional QoS, which is quality of service. So for example, as soon as network traffic arrives destined for your PlayStation, for example, the router will send that straight there. The idea is to remove latency. Everything else that was destined for your PC, your Mac, your Wi-Fi tablet is just going to sit in the queue, and the Netduma is going to send all that PlayStation traffic to your gaming console straight off. So the idea is to remove latency, and again, latency is king. Ping is king. So to improve your online gaming experience, this was the intent of hypertraffic. So for PlayStation, Xbox, it's pretty straightforward. For PC, you may be wondering, well, my PC is called SimJC, so if you want it, you select the Xbox Live service for it, and hey presto, you're done and dusted. But again, I don't use hypertraffic as it causes me, personally, problems. Okay, hypertraffic done. Let's move on to anti-flood at the top of the page. There are two options, reactive or preemptive. That's the name of the two algorithms used by the Netduma to help with that thing I've been mentioning, Bufferbloat. Reactive tends to be used by high bandwidths where downloads are 50 to 70 megs or higher. Now before I get going, another key setup stage, you've got the global sliders at the top, the download and upload cap sliders don't work in the way you may think due to the Bufferbloat algorithms. They are related to each other to do with TCP acknowledgements of packages and stuff. It's low-level network stuff. So by doing a quick test on speedtest.net, for example, you can find out whether reactive gives you the highest download and upload bandwidths than preemptive. Remember, if you're connected directly to a modem and you expect higher speeds than you're getting, play about with the turbo and super turbo buttons. I've heard from some of my mates they've had to have them both ticked for those on Virgin, so where they got 200 megabyte downloads. So what I've done in the past is I've set both sliders to 50% on reactive because reactive gives me the highest download. I've then gone to device manager and manually entered my speeds for bandwidth. So if I go to device manager, edit and adjust those speeds, I don't want to call them speeds, but bandwidth values, and then run the test and continuously run it and tweak those values until 50% actually gave me 50% of my bandwidth. It's a key step that I probably haven't really emphasized enough in previous guides of mine, but that's what I've done. So that's your first step. Go and do that and enter values. Hence why I talk about manually tweaking. Never let the Netduma automatically determine those values for you if you're running PPPoE. It's a reminder, there is a bug associated with that. It cuts down your bandwidth. So my suggestion is to try both, the reactive and preemptive, see what you get. Also note, when you're doing testing that's upcoming, it must be done via wired, Ethernet cable, in other words, no Wi-Fi, and do it when other people are not using your home network. Otherwise it's going to muck up all your results when we come onto the Bufferbloat stuff. In my case, because reactive gives me a higher value than preemptive, I have used both and experimented with both. So the approach is select one of these algorithms like reactive, set the download and upload caps to 100%. I refer to these as the global sliders. Scroll down the page and click reset distribution. I'll explain why later on, but click reset distribution. Then you're going to go and run a Bufferbloat test by going to dslreports.com. This is going to give you your worst case in the sense of how bad your upload and download pings are and your idle pings are. So I like to see the test being executed against 3 servers. In my case, Ireland, UK and a European country, typically Belgium, France or Germany. Most often Belgium, it will automatically do this. Now, by having it test 3 countries, or should we say 3 states for you guys in the USA, it will align more with the Call of Duty experience for, because you're typically interacting with other gamers and getting that more truer value If it's only testing against one country or your local state, it's not really telling you the truth enough, in my experience. So now a lot of people, when they run the test, are just going to focus on this one page and look at the Bufferbloat rating at the bottom and says, A+, sweet, job's done, forget it, move on, we're done. You know, they only start paying attention when it's a B or an F, you know. F's really, really bad. The problem with the Bufferbloat rating is sometimes it lies. Yes, it lies sometimes. They got a coding error in the way they're determining the grading. So I've had a download ping of around 120 milliseconds. That's a lot. That's over a tenth of a second. And it's still reported an A+ Bufferbloat. You know something's wrong. But how did I know something was wrong? So what you want to do is click on the results and share button. And the next page contains much more interesting information, much more. It has 3 bars on the chart showing your idle, so basically what your ping is when you're doing absolutely nothing, very minimal stuff. Downloading, i.e. you're downloading a whopping big game of 20 gigabytes, and uploading, i.e. you're streaming or uploading a video to YouTube, Facebook, whatever, right? So each of these bars is going to have a corresponding minimum and maximum ping. My default pings when the router is under load is not acceptable for Call of Duty World War II. Ideally, I want to see my pings under 30 milliseconds. 20 milliseconds or less is great to take advantage of the new 60 Hz update rate on dedicated servers. I have spoken about the whole 60 Hz and internet requirements in another video, but ideally you want to see that ping under 30 milliseconds. Now here you'll see that the red error bars are quite high for my non-tweaked out-of-the-box values. What we want to see is all those error bars be small, and ideally all 3 columns and bars, all the 3 bars across the chart to be approximately the same height. So the actual physical bar and the error bars ought to be roughly level. So you can put a spirit level on it and be, yeah, good. That will give us a good connection, a stable, good connection with a known reliable latency. So how do you find it? It's through experimentation. I do have a methodology for finding that quickly, but you're still going to have to go and do a load of tests. There's no way around it. So we're going to do a quick set of tests, and the video footage is not going to show you all this because it's going to be boring as anything. So all I want you to do at this point is note a Bufferbloat rating. i.e. does it say A+, A or B? We're going to quickly run a series of tests. So start with reactive, select 100% on both global sliders, click the reset distribution button, then run the DSL reports, note down what your Bufferbloat rating is. Then go and set the global sliders to 99%, yes, upload and download caps both set to 99%, click reset distribution, run the test. You'll notice straight away that your bandwidth has decreased, but your maximum pings will already have started to improve. Then set the global sliders to 90%, click reset distribution, run the test. Note the Bufferbloat rating. Then do it again for 80%, then 70%. Keep going down by 10% at a time until you hit 10%. So you've now got a whole set of reactive Bufferbloat testing results. Now switch the algorithm to preemptive, select 100%, run the test. Having done, click reset distribution first, then set it to 99%, click reset distribution, run the test, set it to 90%, click reset distribution, run the test, go down by 10%, keep doing it to 10%. Now you're going to have a series of results of basically 10 or 11 results per reactive and preemptive, and you'll be able to see which algorithm gives you the best Bufferbloat rating as a whole. So for me, preemptive works the best, reactive just doesn't. But for other people out there in the world, reactive is the algorithm that does the job. So this is why you got to go and do that. So it'll give you a quick fire way of determining which algorithm gives you the most consistent best rating. Now what you want to do now is go back and rerun those tests against the best algorithm you've discovered so far, and then click on the results and share button to see which values when you go 99, 90, 80, 70, 60 gives you the best ping and a consistent one. Now, once you've gone through that and you've run it through and you've picked out that 80%, 40%, 30% preemptive, for example, which is my typical case, gives you a good Bufferbloat setting, i.e. those error bars are really small and the A+ rating. But I really focus on the error bars. I want consistent small error bars and the bar charts to be the same size, more or less. So once you've found out what those ones are, you want to then run the test against those particular settings a few times, because you want to make sure that you have a stable setting. If you keep getting erratic results between all 3 runs, so if I do the test 3 times after another, having not changed it and said, okay, I tried 80%, I ran it 3 times, and I'm getting wildly varying results each time, then it suggests that you don't have a stable setting. So you want to go and move on to the next one and run it and see what happens to be stable. All you want is like 1 to 2 to 3 milliseconds variance between these reruns. If you're getting 20, 30, 40, 50 milliseconds differences each time you run it, it's not stable. So yes, by having done all of that work, yes, I'm sorry, you have to do a bit of work and you run all those tests, you should now know the key settings to use to give you minimal Bufferbloat to help you with your online gaming. Now, latency, i.e. ping, is king in the online gaming world as a whole. I know the ping is king phrase from Call of Duty World War II will really work some people up right now, but from an online gaming experience, ping is king. The lower, the better. Now, there's a reason I've been using bandwidth and latency throughout this guide as the terms. I'm not using the word speed. Trying desperately to avoid using the word speed because it gets misused. Bandwidth is how much water, data can I get down a pipe at one time. The latency is how fast can I get that water, data to arrive to me, measured via ping. Typically you have to reduce your bandwidths by about 50% or so to get good latency. So as you'll see on the screen, 40% preemptive for me is stable, and this is the kind of graph you're looking for. Remember, if your base ping, the one like typically you can ascertain via speedtest.net for example, is 24 milliseconds, you're never going to get a lower value than that. What you want to control is your maximum ping and make sure it's consistent, so those little error bars you want to make sure are pretty much the same across the board. So this is what we use for global Bufferbloat control. Recently, for those of you who've been following me on my streams and stuff with the Call of Duty lag comp experiments, I've been using device prioritization because we've gone a little bit old school with the latest Call of Duty, going back to the days of my TP-Link videos. Device prioritization allows you to control your bandwidth of what devices on your network are allowed to have. By default, it is a bun fight for all devices, i.e. they're going to get what they're going to get. So as new devices come onto the network, I recommend clicking Reset Distribution. It defaults everything on this device prioritization chart, as weird things can happen that you didn't expect if you don't do so. So there are 2 tabs, Upload and Download, to control bandwidth respectively. You have Share Access, which is ticked by default. You can control the bandwidth to each device, hence why we've named them, by adjusting their flower petal. This is my name for it. This is the little circles with numbers in them. In my particular case, you can see that the flower petals are defaulted to 7. You'll note I have 15 devices, and 15 times 7 equals 105%. So what you're being displayed are rounded up numbers, i.e. 6.67 has been shown as 7, and even that 6.67 is rounded up because it's a recurring number. Sweet. Anyway, you get the idea. The integer values, that's whole numbers, that are being displayed inside the flower petals are not entirely accurate because they are being rounded up. What you may not expect is when you're sliding around a flower petal with shared access ticked to have any impact on your bandwidths, right? You know, it's not going to reduce your download or upload. You would be so wrong. So in this case, I got 100% on my global sliders. If I do a reset distribution before the test, and I'm running the test on the Sims Beast as it's shown, you may not expect upload to have any effect on download, but if I go and slide the flower petal, and click update distribution, it does. So it affects the download just a smidge because upload and download are related, especially when it comes to TCP IP. It's a low-level network thing to do with packet acknowledgement. It's a guaranteed delivery mechanism. Unlike UDP, which is fire and forget unless the application encodes something in the Ethernet payload. Okay, so I got a bit techie there. So once you alter the download, you'll see a significant drop in bandwidth. Even though share access is ticked and my Xbox One is off, ignore the Bufferbloat result at this point in time. We're just interested in bandwidth. And you can see moving pedals has effect even though share access is ticked. So as I alluded to earlier, for those of you who've watched my streams, you know when it comes to Call of Duty World War II, I've been using device prioritization. So what I need to do is lower the bandwidth for the game because it really doesn't need it, but at the same time have a good buffer bloat. Remember, ping is king, latency is king. I want a low ping. So as I mentioned earlier, I covered the network monitor and it's really easy to see how much bandwidth a game uses. So I can just untick everything, watch the bandwidth that my console is using while playing World War II and notice that the maximum peaks to 500k down and 300k up. But don't just get fixated on bandwidth. Don't just go and throttle your bandwidths to 500k and 300k because remember, ping is king. Yes, latency is king. Are you getting it yet? So when it comes to online gaming in general, latency is king. You want your ping to be as low as possible, no massive spikes in it. So rather than reducing bandwidth globally via the two congestion control sliders at the top of the page, you're likely to really annoy your housemates, etc., right? You don't want to annoy your household, especially your wife, right? So, or girlfriend, or whatever. So what you want to do is therefore use device prioritization. So for me, I personally found that 20% upload and 10% download gave me good results. And that typically translates to about 8 megabytes down and about 2 to 3 megabytes up. Because I stream, then I have to set upload and download figures appropriately for my streaming laptop, typically somewhere around 15% download, 45% upload. Again, I have to experiment because I can't remember the figures directly off my head. So we can use device prioritization to allocate bandwidth appropriately. But when you're doing this Bufferbloat testing, the one thing I wanted to stress, and I haven't mentioned earlier, is quality. Because you're really nerfing your bandwidth more than you should have been for the global congestion control. What you do not want is a rating less than D, so you don't want an E to F. A rating of F is bad as the Netduma is throwing away too many packets. But you might go, but Sim, I got really good buffer bloat. Look at this, A+, the little error bars are sweet. I don't care that my quality is F. Oh yes you do, because this translates to packet loss. Your Netduma is throwing away too many packets. What's that mean? All those bullets that you're firing at the enemy are being thrown away by the Netduma because you're just throttling it too hard. So you're going, I can't kill enemies. Yeah, because you throttled it too hard. And your router is throwing away your bullets. It's going, yeah, we don't need to send that, throw it away. In a bin. So you've noticed that I've had to increase download for another device in the particular footage you're watching, and that's my TP-Link router that serves the rest of the household. You've got the Sim gaming network in all of his kits, and you've got the rest of the household sitting behind the TP-Link router. Because I still want to ensure that they can still watch, you know, YouTube, Netflix, Amazon Prime, all of that jazz, right? So hopefully you get it, what I've been saying. You want to find out what preemptive or reactive is the best algorithm for you, determine what your base ping is, do a series of tests on the dslreports.com, determine which algorithm gives you the best buffer bloat as a whole from a rating perspective. Then you know that's the algorithm you want to use by default for when you're using global congestion control sliders. When it comes to device prioritization, I personally then have the algorithm set to reactive and 100% download and upload because I want maximum download speeds, because now I'm using the device prioritization algorithm, whatever that is. It could be a lot more basic to get good buffer bloat for console or laptop or gaming PC, machine, whatever of interest. And at the end of the day, you're looking to have those error bars to be small and consistent across all 3 bars for idle, download and upload. That is the name of the game. So for games like Call of Duty, World War II, you'll need lower bandwidths. For other games that do proper netcode, such as Titanfall 2, you just need to set it to, 80% or something global wise, and you'll be done. You don't have to muck about with reducing your bandwidth due to poor lag compensation code that's 10 years old. Nah. Right, so let's now move on to the pièce de la résistance, the main reason you most likely got yourself a Netduma, the host filtering feature. Yes, this one is really important for Call of Duty gamers, and I suspect most people who've got a Netduma play Call of Duty, and that's the reason they bought it. The host filtering, in my experience so far, is less important for proper dedicated server games, such as those by EA. Think Battlefield and Titanfall. You're only going to see the server and none of the other players, in my experience. So from my point of view, if I was only playing Titanfall 2 or Battlefield, congestion control is the only feature I really need to focus on. Generally, I can, within a game, select the dedicated data center, being London, I don't know, Germany somewhere, France, USA somewhere. And I will know that I've selected the best data center possible that hosts a whole vast array of dedicated servers. Okay. So, congestion control feature is the only feature, in my personal experience, that's really applicable to EA games. That may be different for some. I do not play any of the sporting games. I only play shooters, man. Activision games, on the other hand, such as Call of Duty and Destiny, yes, players will be shown and the geofilter really comes into play. So let's start at the top. Since we've named our devices, it makes it so much easier to select them. You can see why I've done this video in a particular order. Especially if you have multiple consoles, because you can name them like Tom's Xbox and Jane's Xbox, for example. I've got 2 Xboxes now. I've got an Xbox One X and an Xbox One Original. Now you've got to go and add them. So in the example footage you're seeing on screen, let's say I want to remove my Xbox One X Scorpio Edition from the list so I can play my PC. I click on Select Service, select the device, click Next, select for PC Xbox Live. For a PlayStation, you select PlayStation Network. Strange that. And for Xbox, you select Xbox Live. There's the PC one that will throw most people. You select Xbox Live for PC. And then you click Done. And that's all I do. There's other advanced stuff there. I don't muck about with it. I don't think you need to do so. You'll get a real specialist if you are, and then go and talk to Netduma tech support if you need help. So notice that the device type we've associated with each device on the network in the device manager that we did earlier also affects the icon displayed here against like Sims Beast. It shows that typical big monitor, right? And all the other gaming consoles show those little gaming controllers, yeah. So the show host tick box naturally will show host on the geofilter, so you pretty much want those ticked. The enable tick box lets you know whether your geofilter is in effect for that device. I typically only have it ticked on one device at a time. If you happen to have 2 people who are gaming on both Xboxes or an Xbox and a PS4 at the same time, then you'll want to tick the tick box on both. But I tend to have that only ticked whilst I'm gaming, and then I untick it post that. So let's move on to the geofiltering options. Peer ping is only useful for games such as Call of Duty and possibly Destiny. Remember I said when we're connecting to other players and we see them on a geofilter map? Other EA games don't show you that typically, so it's not a useful feature. When it's ticked, it allows you to see pings of other players in your lobby when you're actually playing a match. So you're in the game and you're fighting away, shooting at each other. And I believe that obviously the geofilter option must be ticked, because why would you not have it ticked for this bar chart to populate? But I've noticed that not all players are shown. And this is presumably because the firewalls are either blocking ping requests or they happen to be outside the geofilter due to Sod's Law and all the rest of it, and thus aren't shown. So just be aware. But it gives you an indication of typical player pings in your lobbies. Thus, this feature could be used for diagnostic reasons. I don't typically have this feature enabled for Netduma performance reasons again, but it can help you validate that you've got a good geofilter setup and everything else, and you've optimized your geofilter. So once ticked, you'll see that peer pings is shown below the geofilter. As you have a maximum of 4 devices that the geofilter can be applied to, you will see a 1 to 4. So 1 is the service on the left, in my case the Xbox, 2 is the PlayStation 4, 3 is the PlayStation 3, 4 was the Xbox Scorpio, but is now my PC, known as Sims Beast. So you can only have 1 selected, so if you're gaming on PS4, go select 2 in my case. Auto ping host does exactly what it suggests. As soon as you get into game, it's going to ping the host. It can be useful to confirm a ping of a host at the start of the match, but typically I turn this off again due to performance reasons, and a pop-up dialog that can cause issues because it keeps coming up and then says, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem, and then the page doesn't update. If I'm really interested in watching the ping of a dedicated server, then, or whoever the host is, I will watch the map of the geofilter and then click on that host, which will be typically the largest circle, and then ping it. Obviously, if you see the temp ban button appear, then you know it's a dedicated server. Having kilometers ticked is literally that. The slider range of the geofilter is shown in kilometers. Unticked, it shows it in miles. Take your choice. I leave it on kilometers. It doesn't really matter. Strict mode, it's an important feature. When enabled, the original intent of this feature was to exclude players from outside of the geofilter when forming a lobby via matchmaking. Back in the days of Advanced Warfare, this worked really well, but in recent days this might have been circumvented a little bit by the recent Call of Duties. However, I always have this ticked. What the strict mode guarantees with 100% certainty is that the host is inside the geofilter. The low resolution map option, well, ticking this does exactly what it says. The most noticeable difference is you'll see for the US, all the states being removed, all those state lines will just disappear. It also reduces the browser CPU load, so if you're doing stuff on a low powered laptop, i.e. sim streaming laptop and streaming at the same time, I have this option ticked because I want to be able to still stream and glance at the geofilter map from time to time without overloading my CPU and cutting out the stream. Similarly, you might be recording gaming footage but you're happening to glance at the Netduma, or you're running it on a low powered, tablet, etc. or mobile phone. So that's what that option is there for. Show dormant hosts is a useful feature to have ticked, especially when you launch a game and go into the multiplayer menu. You'll see that all the initial circles you see that on the map that pop up will be dedicated servers. So if you want to get an idea where they are in the world, have that option ticked. Show legend, I typically untick because when I'm zooming into the maps for, like the UK, it's going to obscure the map, so I don't have it ticked. The zoom icon does exactly that, zooms into the map by the specified zoom factor, and it's a useful feature to see what's going on in your part of the world. Also useful for very fine repositioning of your home location. Pay attention because I'm going to talk about that later. So the down arrow icon, which is next to the zoom, is just meant to make your life easier by auto expanding the geofilter to include the next set of dedicated servers. I personally do not use this. I manually resize my geofilter because I've optimized my home location and I know what I want to include and what I don't want to include. We'll come on to the geofilter optimization very shortly. The recycle arrow button, as I call it, the 2 little arrow circles that are above each other, are used for clearing temporary bans, i.e. when you've banned a dedicated server. It's also a very useful button to clear out padlocks when the geofilter's got itself a bit pickled. I tend to expand the geofilter to almost cover the entire world, but not quite, and then click the clear temporary bans button, and hey presto, a couple of minutes later all dedicated servers are talking again to the Netduma, or the Netduma should I say is no longer blocking them by its inbuilt firewall, which is what the geofilter is. So the thumbs down button, I believe this has been a deprecated feature and it's no longer used by Netduma themselves. If you've got problems with servers being mislocated, for example, then you need to report that information by yourselves using the ID that you get in the forum. There'll be like a post per console and game. The filter by distance again does exactly what it says. It controls the size of the geofilter. You'll notice that when I shrink it, my geofilter surrounds the UK and Ireland, and thus I've repositioned the home location to be in the sea. Hence, I've done this fine manipulation via the zooming in. I'm going to talk about the geofilter optimization very soon. So ping assist is another very useful feature. It's a feature you should definitely use, especially if you've got strict mode enabled. If you have the ping assist value set to 0, then this feature is disabled. But I use the ping assist to find unknown or mislocated, i.e. a UK server that pretends it's in Seattle in the USA, so I can still game. So what I do is select my nearest or my best dedicated server, or data center truly for me, and ping it. And typically for that South Coast data center, I get a ping value of 7. I then add 10 to it, and I set ping assist to 17. So if I have any dedicated servers that fluctuate a bit, I will connect to a dedicated server that apparently is shown in the wrong part of the world, and you'll get the dashed line circle, and therefore I know I still get to game on a dedicated server even if the Netduma thinks it's in the US of A, for example, right? It could think it's in Australia, but it's not really. It's in the UK, or it's in France or Belgium, because the 17 milliseconds will cover those particular dedicated servers for me. Now, optimizing the geofilter. I covered this in one of my previous videos where I gave you a methodology for how to optimize your geofilter, and thus I'm going to reuse some of the graphics from that particular video. The idea is to use speedtest.net and select different servers within your country, surrounding countries, and north and south cities for the large countries, or and translate countries to states for those of you who are in the US of A. This will give you an idea about players and what their typical latency pings are, and you want to game with lower latency players in general, those with low pings. Back when I created that methodology video, I used pingtest.net as it showed jitter 2. In other words, how much the ping varied, what the low ping was and what the max ping was. Unfortunately, that useful site has been retired, and it also appears that speedtest.net has been simplified too. Where before you could select geographically from a map visually, you now have to type city names in, so there's a little bit more work to do. So you have to type Paris, for example, to run the test against the server and attain ping values. So at the end of the day, you would have built up a rough ping map of servers around you for states and countries. Not as nicely as probably the ones in my Photoshop map, yeah, but you'll get an idea of what the typical pings are from surrounding cities around where you live. Now, if you bear that ping map in mind that's specific to you, you can keep that in mind also about where dedicated servers are, i.e. their locations. So you can use the Netduma to ping those particular dedicated servers and optimize your geofilter appropriately. You select the circle and click ping. Now, I find that I typically have to have my geofilter just touch the Belgium server purely for matchmaking reasons, otherwise I can't find a game. This is the server, or strictly the data center hosting multiple servers, that I've nicknamed the Swiss cheese server, as for those of you who follow me on stream, as some of the servers that reside in that data center have very high jitter. And what I mean by that is their base ping is 15 milliseconds, but will spike up typically to 80 milliseconds inside a game, and don't you know it. Early in the day, when I'm gaming early and not late, I tend to also include the Northern France server for me. I'm telling you this purely because a lot of UK gamers are going to typically copy my settings because they don't want to go and do all of this groundwork themselves. So when you've launched your game, just gone into the multiplayer menu, and you have show dormant servers ticked, you'll see all dedicated servers light up. You won't get nice and yellow as me, you'll get the other 4 colors as shown in the legend. But by unticking the show dormant servers, you'll then see the real server that the game is actively talking to right now. And in my case, it's the Belgium server, hence why I need to include it in my geofilter. So you can use the same trick wherever you live in the world to see what key server your game of interest needs to connect to. So that's how you go and optimize your geofilter. Now, allow and deny. It's a very useful feature. The allow and deny feature at the bottom of the page is, in my eyes, got two main uses. One, block hackers, typically on old Call of Duties where it's peer-to-peer and there is no dedicated servers. And secondly, to whitelist friends who live outside of my geofilter. There's another YouTuber that I've clicked on. Woohoo! So that means that I can game in a UK lobby or a European lobby, game with people from Australia, US of A, wherever. But know that pretty much if I had like 5 people in my lobby who were all from UK and we had one Australian or one from the US of A or one from Canada to make up that 6-man party, then 5 of us are going to have a good experience. The other one is going to have maybe less of a better game experience, but it isn't going to screw up the matchmaking as much. But we've whitelisted it so that the person can play with us. So blocking is simply done. So blocking hackers, for example, is simply done by clicking on that large circle whilst you're in the hacked lobby and you're in a game and you're flying through the air and shooting people and getting 1,000,000 points per kill and all that jazz, right? You can just give it a name. So you click on that larger circle, give it a name such as COD hacker or whatever, give it a low rating of 1 to 2% so it's in the red zone of the deny, click update and you're done. Whitelisting is the opposite, except here I tend to put them in between the red and green range because I don't want them in the green, because otherwise there'll be a host. The Netduma will allow them to be the host and I don't want that because they're way outside my geofilter. If I did want them to be a host, or let's say it was a key server, for example, that allows me to play World War II, then I'll put it in a green zone and tick it and give it a higher percentage. But typically when it comes to servers, that's what I use ping assist for, to find, allow me or allow the Netduma to connect to unknown or mislocated dedicated servers. So that is the geofilter covered. Almost towards the end of the video, almost there. So profiles is a feature I do not personally use on a daily basis. For me, it's there to save key settings, especially if I have to do a factory reset or somebody has been mucking around with my Netduma settings. But that's why you've got username and password to stop the little troublesome fingers from mucking around with your settings, right? Anyway, so to save current settings tab. When I'm saving a profile, I do not save the following. I do not save anti-flood settings because it's going to vary between game, and generally you're going to have a optimized Bufferbloat settings that you've already noted down. I don't save cloud settings. Remember, I'm going to load the bleeding edge cloud data, and if I need to, I can flush the cloud and reload it. So for me, I don't save it. So as I've illustrated earlier, device prioritization, I always click reset distribution as it's dependent on the number of devices on your network. So there's no point saving that device prioritization at all. And it's going to have associations with devices as a whole, which will probably cause other problems, especially if you save the host filtering services, because there's a serious bug with that, especially if you do a factory reset. So do not ever save host filtering services and never restore them, because otherwise you'll have to factory reset because your geofilter will be broken. So moving on to load profiles tab. I think I've already hammered this, but I'm going to hammer it again. Never ever select restore host filtering services. You will have an unusable host filtering page, as the 4 devices will just be unusable at the top of the page. If you've selected it accidentally, you're going to have to do a factory reset via the settings miscellaneous page. In my personal opinion, it's all to do with the order that the devices get registered in the Netduma, and it mucks itself up. The load, allow and deny list, I definitely recommend selecting merge on that one, so that if you've happened to have added any other, let's say YouTubers, gamers, hackers, since your last save that still remembers post a factory reset, then you don't throw away all of those too. So manage profiles. It allows you to delete them, or more importantly, export them to your PC, Macintosh, whatever, and then import them back in so you don't throw away all your valuable, hard grafted settings and stuff. So that pretty much covers the Netduma, and this is a bit more of a marathon video than I originally wanted, but it's the all-in-one everything. But there are 3 bugs of the Netduma that I want to cover, and that is the PPPoE automatic bandwidth. If you ever get that prompt, select no. You will lose bandwidth. The fix I found for this is that you need to select turbo or super turbo, re-enter the manual bandwidth values in the device manager edit bandwidth screen, and eventually you're going to get the full bandwidth back, and then you can unselect turbo and super turbo and off you go. Hypertraffic causes me issues with padlocks and geofilter stability, and this problem tends to be exacerbated with multiple consoles. Profiles, but there's the bug. I've emphasized this just a second ago. Never ever restore host filtering services. If you do, it's going to break your geofilter, you won't be able to use it, and you'll need to do a factory reset to fix it. So that concludes the guide. What a marathon of a guide. You can see why I just haven't produced it earlier. There's a lot of information, and hopefully I've covered everything. I've gone through the whole everything in a very logical, pragmatic order to help you guys out and hopefully fill in any missing blanks and stuff that you guys may have had in the past. And at the end of the day, the intent is for you guys to have the best online gaming experience you can possibly get. Remember, this is a guide when it comes to the geofilter optimization and other bits and pieces. If a game is broken, no router or anything is going to fix it. Only the developer is going to fix it. But it's going to give you the best fighting chance you can have when it comes to online gaming. So I hope you guys really appreciate this, the amount of effort that's gone into this video. Appreciate a thumbs up to get that video out there. As always, if you're new and you want to see more videos in future, hit that subscribe button. And until next time, this has been Sim.